So in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to make the candlestick on the lathe. You're going to see here early on, I'm just taking this piece of cherry, just rounding it off, taking it down and making it round. It started off, it was more square, and now I'm just rounding it off here and just finishing up that process. You can see again here what the tool is going to look like that I'm going to be using. You can see a good picture of it there. This tool is very sharp, and it will cut very easily. Just nice medium pressure onto the wood, and it will do a good job of cutting for you. Be careful not to gouge it in, or it can leave big gouge marks into the piece of wood as well. You can also see my hand placement, putting my pointer finger, resting it right on the tool rest, and just working it across nice and evenly, making sure you get the piece of wood round. So here you can see a picture, an overall picture of the candlestick, as well as the calipers that I have that I will check sizes of the candlestick. I want to start off by making this thing as big as I can, as the base is supposed to be here, by checking the size. And as you can see here, it is too big right now, so I'm going to take it down using the gouge tool that I was using earlier to make it to the appropriate size of the base. Checking it again, checking to see if it's the right size, and this is about perfect here, so we are going to leave that size alone. And now what I'm looking at next here is an overall picture of the candlestick. I'm going to get a ruler out, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to mark out the overall length, which is 7.5 inches, and I'm going to mark that out on the piece of wood here, and going to be able to make everything to the correct size. The piece of wood I have here is about 8 inches long, so I'm going to have a 1/2 inch on the bottom and a 1/2 inch on the top that's going to be waste at the end. And what I'm doing right now is just marking a spot for my top and marking a spot for the base here with a pen or a pencil, and then I'm going to draw a line on there so that you can see where the base is going to be. And then we will take the waste wood and we'll take that down and get rid of it. So I just turn the lathe on and make a nice mark that you can see, so that way you know where the base and where the top is. This tool is called a separating tool, and that is what I'm going to use to part this piece of wood out down to the correct sizes that I want. So I take that piece, hold it to the right side of the line, and I'm just going to take the wood down to the right side of that line. This is all going to be waste wood. I'm just going to continue to take that down until there's not a whole lot left, and I'm going to do that on the base, and I'm also going to do that up on the top here. I'm going to just continue to gouge that down and take it down a ways, and that is going to set the base and also set the top of where my candlestick is going to be. So here, what I'm checking now is the sizes and then the distances to each point that I have to cut down to. So the first one I have is 1 inch on the base of my candlestick, and I'm going to mark down or measure over 1 inch. And again, draw a line, and I'm going to take that with the separating tool, and I'm basically just going to gouge down until I get to the size that I wanted. So again, drawing a line on there with my pen, and then I'm going to take my separating tool and just take it right down until I check with the calipers to get to the size that I want it to be at. As you can see here, it's drawn to scale. It's supposed to be at 3/4 of an inch, so I just set my calipers for that width, and then I can check to see if I am to the right width. I didn't quite get to that point yet, so I continue with the separating tool until I get down to the 3/4 of an inch. Now we're going to move over to the next point of measurement, which is 1.25 inches farther over. So again, I'm just going to take my ruler and I'm going to mark over at 1.25 inches, and then check my drawing to see the diameter that it is supposed to be at that point right there. So just kind of repeating the same process here that I used in the previous step. And I'm going to mark out my next point of measurement as well, so that I have the next two that I can work to. Again, drawing a couple of lines so you can see them a little bit better, and then I'm just going to take the separating tool again here and just continue to gouge down to, this calls for 1 1/4 inch that this has to be to, so I'm just going to gouge down to that point. And I like to keep checking it with the calipers as I go, because you don't really want to make this stuff too small, because when you sand, it is going to be make it even a little bit smaller. So you don't want to get it too small. If anything, leave it just a little bit big. This one calls to go down to 1/2 inch, so I'm going to take this one down quite a long ways, all the way down till I get to just about 1/2 inch. So I'm putting my last marking on there for the last point of measurement, and again I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to take that down to, I believe it calls for 5/8 of an inch. As again, you can measure right off of the drawing because it is drawn to scale. And this is in a time lapse, so it's a lot faster than what it would normally be. And again, you got to continue to check your drawing to make sure that you're making everything to the right size. So here you can see the next tool I'm going to use is start to cut the shapes in, and we're going to start to cut a little round over to be able to make this thing look like what the drawing shows. So I'm going to use a small gouge tool for that, and I'm just going to start at my first point of measurement, and I'm going to start to create basically like a little inside circle here that you'll start to see that shows up. And again, I want to pay attention to what it looks like on the drawing and continue to check my measurements to make sure that I turn this thing accurately. So I continually check the drawing and just continually check back to my lathe project to make sure that I've made this thing to the right size. This tool works pretty nice because it's nice and small. It gets into tight spaces really well. So anytime I'm doing small, tight spaces, I like to use the smaller rounded gouge out tool. So here I'm just going to the next point of measurement, which I already have taken down with the separating tool. So I just continue to work to each point of measurement now. It becomes a little bit easier as you start to get closer to the point where you want to be. But yeah, you're just working down to your points of measurement, checking your shapes, checking your sizes as you go. And again, I like to use the smaller tool in tight spaces. It just seems to work a little bit better. This tool I have here is just a bigger rounded over gouge out tool. It just works a little bit better for longer areas. It just cuts it a little bit evenly, or more even, so that's why I'm showing you this tool. I like to use this one when I have a little bit bigger areas that I'm working as well, so just getting that down to a little smaller. And then the next one here is similar. It's just flat on the top. Again, this one works really well for longer stretches, so because it's not as small as what the previous tool was. So these two work really well for when you're doing a little bit wider areas and you're just taking down big sections like this, trying to take off a lot of wood. So I'm getting close now to getting to the diameter that it's supposed to be at, and as you get to that point, you want to take it careful, otherwise you're going to take too much off. And it also works to make a nice slow finishing cut. It doesn't create near as many marks in the piece of wood, and it's not going to gouge up the piece of wood as much. So as you get close to the right size, you just kind of want to go nice and slow to make sure you make it to the correct size. Again, you can kind of see it starting to take shape here. I just got to finish up the top now, as that's what I'm doing next here, cutting that down to 1 1/4 inches, so I can take that whole top section down to that 1 1/4 inches, and that's kind of what I'm going to do here. Again, with the smaller tool here, it just again helps in smaller spaces. You can see here I'm getting closer to getting it to the right size. This does take time. Again, this is time-lapse video, so it's going in fast motion, but this does take time, and just continue to pay attention to the shape that it's supposed to look like, and also the size as well. You do not want to make the head too small, or we will not be able to drill the right size hole in the top of the candlestick when we are done. So pay close attention to make sure that the head does not get to be too small. Otherwise, that's going to cause you problems later on. This tool right here works really well for getting into really tight corners because it's got a point on the end. So you kind of can define your little tight points a lot better off with this tool. It's kind of hard to tell in the video here, but anywhere where it calls for it to come to a kind of a nice tight corner, I like to use that tool, as well as the small gouge out tool. And here I'm just kind of cleaning everything up, making it a little bit more defined, making it look a little bit better. And then just kind of maybe fixing also any little chips or anything like that, any marks that were left. I wanted to come back and check those as well. So again, you can kind of see how it looks pretty close to what it's supposed to look like, and that's kind of the goal here. You want to take a look and check to see that there's no defects to the wood or anything like that. And also just kind of check if there is, you're going to want to make it a little smaller in that section right there as well. You can kind of see there's a spot there where it didn't look very good when I turned it off. Sometimes it's hard to tell when the lathe is on, so you got to turn it off to look and see if you see any spots where it doesn't look very good, and hopefully you can clean it up with the tool. I'm also going to take out that little spot of bark right there by just taking it down a little farther, and that's going to clean that bottom of the candlestick up as well. All right, so the last thing you're going to do here is you're going to start sanding it. I'm going to start with a very gritty sandpaper. This is about 40 grit, and you're going to have a lot of tool marks left in your piece of wood from when you are done tooling it on the lathe, and now we want to take all those tool marks out. So we're going to start with like a 40 grit sandpaper, and we are going to sand until we get all of those tool marks out. You're probably going to have scratches in the wood when you're done with that 40 grit, but that's okay. The goal is to take out all of the tool marks, or anything else, any chips or anything that might have been left over from the tools that you were working on. Very important that you do not change the shape of the candlestick as you are doing it. As you can tell, I'm folding up the sandpaper to continue to keep the same shape. You don't want to lose the nice shape that you made originally. Again, I'm just checking here to see if there's any continual defects that I need to continue to sand out. If you notice too, there is dust coming off there. If you are sanding and not making dust, you're really not doing anything. So ensure that there is dust coming off when you are sanding. Next, I moved up to an 80 grit. So after 40, you go to an 80, and the goal is every grit you move up, you'll continually make those scratches that you put in it smaller and smaller and smaller until they're gone. If you go from a 40 grit to a 220 grit, you're going to leave big scratches in there that you'll never be able to sand out. So you got to gradually work your way up. Again, being careful not to change the shape of the project, folding that sandpaper and working your way up. The last grit I'm going to use, I'm going to go all the way up to 220 grit, and that's going to give it a nice shine. It's going to make it look all nice and shiny when you do put your finish on it. So that's the last grit I'm going to use as I'm sanding all the way up before I put the finish on. So here's kind of the finished product. Again, not a whole lot of defects in the wood. You get all the scratches out, all the tool marks out, and that's kind of what your finished product should look like.